Another defense that people are actually deploying quite a bit, and even though it's not foolproof, it's useful, is that a good site says, I don't want to ever be framed by a bad site. So this is called frame busting. I want to make sure I'm not being framed. Okay, so Google.com can say, I'm not okay with being framed. Bank of America doesn't want to be framed, you know, by other sites. Okay, they're not okay with being framed. Now, how do they prevent a bad site from framing them? Okay, bad site can just do frame, source, Bank of America, right? So how does Bank of America prevent themselves from being framed? So this is called frame busting, and usually people, like web servers like Bank of America, deploy something called the frame busting code. And this code usually checks whether they are being framed, and if they're framed, try to do a counteraction. For example, if top is not self, basically, if the top level page is not itself, like Bank of America is not a top level page, that indicates there's someone else who's the top level page, then you can actually set top location to be yourself. So basically, if Bank of America is being framed, they can completely, take over the page, in the sense of they can set themselves to be the outer page, so then the outer page is lost. Okay, you're basically just having Bank of America as the full page. So frame busting is very common. Okay, a lot of the sites deploy, and there's so many methods for doing it, which is a problem, because they're not, you might be missing something, or they're not all effective, or there could be bugs. There's so many ways to check whether you're the top level window, and there's many different counteractions you can try to take. And for example, this one, you're just writing yourself to null. Okay, if you are being framed, you're just writing yourself to null, you're refusing to be there. Another one was to just make yourself the top level page. And there's so many methods, and it's so complex that it actually has bugs. And so most current frame busting mechanisms can be defeated. They still help prevent a class of attackers, but they can still be defeated. So let me give you some example. Consider that bank.com wants only bank.com site to frame it. So they only want to be framed by itself. No one else should frame bank.com, because that's dangerous.
Sorry, question
yeah.
from David. What does it mean to take over as top? I thought the inner frame can't interfere with the outer frame.
Yeah, very, very good question. Yeah, that's, again, the peculiarities of the web. So indeed, the inner frame cannot access anything on the outer frames page, cannot access any resource, cannot modify resources, but the inner frame can just redirect, basically, essentially, the URL to itself, right? So they just completely have the browser display them, the inner page. So essentially, the outer frame is lost, but that doesn't mean that it interfered with any resources or read anything on the outer page. It simply made the browser display the inner page. So the browser is going to have the inner page right now be the URL in the address bar, and you're going to see the inner page, and the outer page is no longer there. Okay, you can always redirect users, essentially, but the inner page was not able to access any resources inside the outer page. Is it clear? Any questions? Yeah, Ankit is asking whether browsers can implement functionality so that the site can set some data saying it does not want to be framed. Exactly, we'll get to that. There's absolutely some headers that the web server can set, the X-frame options, to say that they don't want to be framed. We'll get to that. So let's look at this frame busting code. So this bank wants to protect itself from being framed, doesn't want to be framed. So it says, if the top location is not me, and the document referrer, okay, so it's basically looking into the URL of the top location. So it's looking to the URL, so the referrer is the page that actually loaded the inner frame of bank.com. If that URL doesn't contain bank.com, then it's going to replace the top level page to bank.com. If the URL contains bank.com, then it's going to be fine with being framed, okay? Because it's okay to be framed by itself. Does anybody see any problems with this frame busting code? Know why you're saying index off? Can you explain more what you mean? You can probably place bank.com is the get arguments. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So see, what happens here is, as Noah is saying, is index off is a problem. It's a problem that you're searching for bank.com, the string, to show up anywhere in the URL. But it doesn't mean that bank.com is a domain. It could be an argument. For example, this, okay? So I have this attacker, with this domain, badguy.com, simply put himself an argument of bank.com. So this is the URL of the attacker. And then it's framing bank.com. Bank.com has this frame busting code that simply checks whether bank.com shows up in the URL. And bank.com is going to be happy thinking, oh, great, bank.com shows up in the URL, so I'm being framed by myself. But that's a mistake, because bank.com is being framed by badguy.com. And simply the fact that bank.com shows up in the argument is not reassurance that bank.com is framing itself. In this case, we actually have the attacker frame bank.com successfully.